Right, hello, greetings. So it's Dr. Tom Stafford. It's my monthly address, really. I used to do this every week, but time is so precious, and I'm so busy on many fronts that I've decided to make this a monthly talk. So it's Sunday, and it's my January talk. So, greetings. The first thing I'll say is really just, Happy New Year. Happy Christmas just gone, and all the other sacred festivals this time of year. As we move back into the light, we're coming out of a time of darkness, both metaphorically and also physically, here in the Northern Hemisphere. I know that in the Southern Hemisphere it's reversed. That's part of the paradoxical simultaneity of history. So, yeah, it's been quite an intense winter, hasn't it, so far? We're not out of it yet. Been quite cold here in the middle of France, like hers, where I live, but beautiful in its, starkness sometimes. And the first thing I want to do is just reflect on the meaning of Epiphany. We've just had January the 6th, which is the time when the wise men come and give Jesus his presents, or his family rather. And this is a very interesting passage. I just want to reflect on what Epiphany means. In the Orthodox Church, they regard this as the real Christmas, and they celebrate it. So to all my Orthodox Christian friends, happy Epiphany. And also in the West, in the Anglican, Catholic and other Christian traditions, we celebrate Epiphany. The word itself means a kind of manifestation. An epiphany is a moment of great insight or realization. We all need epiphanies. I like this story for many reasons, and I'll explain why as I go through. It's in Matthew's Gospel, which is the first of the Gospels. Jesus was born at Bethlehem, in Judea, during the reign of Herod. After his birth, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the child who was born to be King of the Jews? We observed the rising of his star, and we have come to pay him homage." King Herod was greatly perturbed when he heard this, and so was the whole of Jerusalem. He called a meeting of the chief priests and lawyers of the Jewish people and put before them the question, "Where is it that the Messiah is to be born?" "At Bethlehem in Judea," they replied. And they referred him to the prophecy which reads, "Bethlehem in the land of Judah, you are far from least in the eyes of the rulers of Judah. For out of you shall come a leader to be the shepherd of my people, Israel." Herod next called the astrologers, the Magi, to meet him in private and ascertain from them the time when the star had appeared. He then sent them on to Bethlehem and said, "Go and make a careful inquiry for the child. When you have found him, report to me so that I may go myself and pay him homage." They set out at the king's bidding, and the star which they had seen at its rising went ahead of them until it stopped above the place where the child lay. At the sight of the star they were overjoyed. Entering the house they saw the child with Mary his mother, and bowed to the ground in homage to him. Then they opened their treasures and offered him gifts, gold, frankincense and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned home another way. So that's the story in Matthew, and it's very moving on many levels. Firstly, the word Magi, these three Magi, it means magician, wizard, seer, not just astrologer, as the New English Bible translates it. And in fact, in the Gaelic Bible, it's translated as Druid, which has the more comprehensive overall meaning of a seer, a wise person, who might also be an astrologer. And I've learned a new Old Anglo-Saxon word in the last couple of days for a seer, which is a sewer, S-E-W-A-E-R, a sewer, meaning someone who's aware. So we could say 3 sewers came. The story is very interesting for many reasons. One is that it is a kind of indication that Jesus was from the moment of birth and conception, should we say, was part of a project by the Great White Brotherhood, the Mahatmas, the sages that govern the affairs of humanity behind the scenes. I mean, this is a theosophical idea, which is pretty universal in all religions, that the outer kings and potentates and prime ministers and presidents in the world are just the sort of, they're at a certain level of authority, but beyond them there's a spiritual authority. We can call it the invisible wisdom hierarchy, or there have been many words coined for the seers of humanity who govern the spiritual affairs of mankind. The Magi are part of them. And they're people that have a greater vision, a greater oversight of human affairs. In India, the Brahmins were regarded as the class of people that have that spiritual authority. They're not the warriors of history, the Kshatriyas. And in the Celtic tradition, it was the Druids who were the seers, the seers of the Dharma, which is what the Druid word means. Which is why in the Gaelic Bible in Ireland, these words were translated as 3 Druids come to see the baby Jesus. And so I think in the story we have 3 Druids, let's say, seers of Dharma, seers of truth. We don't know where they come from, we're not told. Just from the east. We're not told if they come from Iran or India. It's another thing that's interesting is they follow a star. Now, what does that mean? I mean, astrologers don't follow moving stars in the sky, which then stops above the stable. I mean, that account is, perplexing to say the least. We can take it as symbolic. The other thing that is interesting is there is a very interesting book by a couple of scholars called The Original Jesus, which is a study of the Buddhist elements in the Christian story, and which claims that Jesus was both personally and also his disciples were influenced by some Buddhist teachings. And they claim that the Gospel of Matthew, which I've just read from, was written in Edessa, which was on the route to India, on the route through Iran to ultimately to India, and above all to Takshila, the monastery where Mahayana Buddhism was being developed at that time. And these authors go into great detail about how it's possible that Jesus himself certainly actually spent some time studying there. And Matthew's Gospel, therefore, is a sort of gateway to the East. And there are many mysteries. I do recommend that book, The Original Jesus, in relation to the mystery of Matthew's knowledge of these things. Because it's only in Matthew you find this story of the 3 Druids or Magi. I think he was otherwise known as Levi. He figures in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene as the one who comes to the defence of Mary Magdalene. Matthew was quite a learned, let's say a Gnostic, esoteric thinker, who in his Gospel presents many interesting signs and clues to what was really going on in the Christ story. What was really going on, I think, is that the spiritual seership of humanity had decided it was time for an incarnation of a high-level being into the planet to try and raise the overall vibrational rate of human beings. and that, you know, I mean, these mysteries are very profound. That somehow that child was conceived and now is born into the world. If you look at Rudolf Steiner's explanation of this incarnational process, how the energy of Sophia behind the Christ child then comes into manifestation. You know, it's fascinating because, of course, the Logos that Philo had been speaking about around the same time was the divine word coming into history in Philo's, you know, salvific history. It overshadows the work of the Jewish people. It overshadows Moses, the great prophets of history. Obviously, the people that wrote the Gospel, Matthew and his disciples, believed that this Logos was overshadowing Jesus and was teaching and trying to elevate mankind to a higher level of awareness. So to me, that's what was going on. And then, of course, Herod, the symbol of the autocratic dictator, the Trump or the Johnson or the Hitler or whatever, you know, they're not interested. They want to kill this thing. I mean, this is the mendacity of Herod. He tries to trick the astrologers, the Druids, in, now look, just go and find out where this baby's born, then come back and tell me what you find out. You know, he's going to kill the guy. He's going to kill the child. I mean, that is the script of all evil dictators ever since, which wish to kill wisdom and snuff it out because it's a threat to their egocentric power. You know, we've just seen the knighthood of Tony Blair being awarded, and I don't think he does deserve it, frankly. I mean, I met Tony Blair when he was just made leader of the Labour Party. I don't think he deserves that knighthood. But then the whole institution of knighthood to me is somewhat suspect because it's an old medieval war fighting thing. And so, yeah, you give it to war fighters. Well, I think there should be a new order of knighthood. Let's call it the Order of Green Knights, or you know, people that strive to protect the planet, that are the new order of knighthood, that seek to preserve nature and respect, as true knights are supposed to do, the wisdom which is within humanity potentially, that are supposed to protect, you know, all the babies that are being born into the world, as these three magi were doing, and they give their gifts as a symbol to that, you know, the newness of life that is represented by the Logos coming into the world. Whereas Herod, the old criminal king, you know, to wit, the Trump, the Blair, the Johnson, I mean, they want to crush out this hope and bring in policies that make poor people even poorer and that only privilege the rich. I mean, Herod was extremely rich. Here's baby Jesus being born, you know, in a stable, in difficult circumstances. So there's a lot of there was a very interesting talk I attended at the Episcopalian Seminary in New York City, which is run by the Episcopalian Church from America, and there was a theologian talking about Mary the Marxist, and she was giving a kind of Marxist interpretation of the Mary story, and you know, Mary was on the side of the poor. In her wonderful speech that she gives later in the Gospels to Elizabeth, when she's sort of, you know, praising God for all the goodness. I mean, she's privileging the poor. That this baby is coming to the world to help the poor, not the rich. And that itself, as this theologian pointed out, has a long tradition in Jewish thought. You know, the prophets were on the side of the poor, the disadvantaged, the homeless, the abandoned, those without hope. And that's why later in Islam it was the same idea. Muhammad picked up that thread when he said, you know, that Islam was about giving dignity and equality to the poor in Mecca and its environment, and to the women who were often outcasts, especially widows. So, can we tap into this good news? I mean, the point of things like Epiphany are to reawaken us now. As Meister Eckhart said, there's no point Christ being born way back then if he's not born again in you now. if this Christ consciousness or divine way of knowing can it be triumphant over the Herods of history? You know, sadly, it's still in the balance. I mean, I would have thought by now we would have advanced to a more peaceful and a loving world, but we have wars going on in all over the world. Little spats, civil wars. We have things going on now in Kazakhstan, tragically. And what's that about? Have the poor risen up in rebellion against the kind of rich rulers? I mean, who's right and who's wrong there in that Kazakhstan collapse of peace? It's the kind of thing the World Intellectual Forum that I'm involved with is trying to look at. You know, can we help mediate these conflicts? Anyway, that's I think the point of Epiphany, is to celebrate that God sends, God meaning the absolute, universal, divine consciousness, divine mind, whatever it is behind the universe, whatever it is that's the creator, sustainer, and revealer of all being. I mean, in a sense, all of life is an epiphany of that being, and we should give homage to that. That's the point of Epiphany, I think, and but it's a fraught enterprise, because the story goes on that Herod is annoyed, the Magi don't come back to him, and then he orders. I'll read. When Herod saw how the Magi had tricked him, he fell into a passion and gave orders for the massacre of all children in Bethlehem and its neighbourhood, of the age of 2 years or less, corresponding with the time he had ascertained from the Magi. And this is called the Massacre of the Innocents, and it seems to have been a historical event. I mean, Herod was really a deranged psychopath. But then, so, are people that have tremendous power. They misuse it, as Lord Acton pointed out. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, which is why Montesquieu and other philosophers of democracy have said we need to share it out, because nobody can carry this alone. We've seen it with people like Netanyahu and other dictator-type people who have this sort of feeling that they are imperiously, divinely chosen to be the ruler of whatever. No, we're all partial voices of truth. Nobody has a monopoly on absolute truth. And therefore that's why democracy has been found, as Winston Churchill said, to be the least worst option. Because let the many voices speak to an issue, and let's find common wisdom, common sense. That was the principle behind the Longhouse, the democracy of the American Indian culture, where Deganawida and other sages would create a structure that gave voice to the many, in order to find the common sense of common vision through synthesis. Okay, so thank you for Epiphany, is all I can say. It was it's an ongoing struggle, isn't it, to somehow outwit the Herods of history and enable the wisdom element to come forward. As I say, that's the work I'm trying to do with the World Intellectual Forum. We've been meeting this whole last year on the 30th of each month. We'll continue to do that. We had a good meeting on the 30th of December, just gone. And 30th of January will be our next meeting. So if you're interested in ideas and sharing and discussion about how we can outwit Herod, how we can outwit the power crazy people of the planet, and bring wisdom to bear, how we can birth that Christ consciousness, not just individually, obviously that's a process of meditation, prayer, study, reflection and so on, but also collectively, how we can do that as a society, as a civilization, as a globe. Then join us in the World Intellectual Forum. That's what we're doing on the 30th of next month. I also just want to say that we've just had the meeting of the Council of the Delphic Games, which is the equivalent to the Olympic Games, but for the arts and for culture. These Delphic Games have been going for 1,000 years in ancient times, revived in the 1990s, through the energy of a number of people, including Christian Kirsch of Berlin, who's been Secretary General for 27 years. Now there was a new International Council meeting. He's been retired as Secretary General, but he's President of the Delphic Games. And now we have Ramesh Prasanna, an Indian from Hyderabad, who is now the new Secretary General. So welcome to Ramesh and congratulations. And I look forward to working with you and other colleagues in the Delphic Games as the educational coordinator. How can we get the Delphic Games more known in the school systems of the world, as much as the Olympic Games are? I mean, every sports department in every school worldwide knows about the Olympic Games and says to the kids who are training in whatever sport, well, if you're really good, you might get to go to the Olympic Games one day, 1 in a million do. Well, I want the art teachers, the music teachers, the dance teachers, the theatre teachers, the poetry teachers to tell their kids that, yeah, these Delphic Games, they're as important as the Olympic Games. And if you're a really great poet or theatre or ballet dancer or folk music performer or whatever it is, in the culture and arts field, you might one day get to compete in the Delphic Games. So, that's the job. And every teacher, every academic who's, interested in the role of the arts in creating peace, really, because that's the key thing about the Delphic Games. The reason I've accepted that sort of position as educational coordinator is because they were a time of peace. You could not compete in the Delphic Games during the ancient world if your city-state was at war. You couldn't sort of, be clobbering other people behind the back and then go and do poetry readings in Delphi. No, it was an international peace event. There's a wonderful passage in the Quran when Muhammad talks about the Shekinah, which descends, the divine peace descends. It's related to the word for the goddess, the Shekinah in Hebrew, Kabbalistic thought. Muhammad talks about the Shekinah is the divine peace that descends at special moments. And that's what the Delphic Games represent. They're a Shekinah moment for all humanity. And every nation on the world, every artist, every theatre group, should be bubbling, in my opinion, with excitement about this and want to take part. So please contact me for further details. And you can, look up on the website and so on. Right, now the institute that I direct and have set up at the University of London, International Institute of Peace Studies and Global Philosophy, what is peace? How can we prepare for it? Delphic Games might help, but what else? We can't sort of just rely on poetry to get us there. We need economics, we need an understanding of human nature, we need psychology, we need to transform the education system so they produce less violent and competitive people, and fewer Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson types who think that life is a cutthroat, business and the biggest bullies win. I mean, that's the Herod school of thought. I'm interested in the Christ school of thought, the St. Matthew school of thought, that wants to produce, minds that put themselves at the service of the community, as Christ did, and that want to elevate us all to a position of enlightenment, not just a few privileged types. So how can we reform the education system so that we think about peace and it's imbued into the very fabric of our schooling and our colleges and universities? That was why I took part in creating the Institute of Peace Studies back at the University of London. I'd still love it if we get a department up and running or a separate institute within the University of London sector, or it could be tucked in as one part of a college like Birkbeck College, where I used to teach and lecture for many years, or University College, where we were going to have a department, but that sort of fell apart. King's College has its Department of War Studies, and it's very successful. Has Lawrence Freedman, who's the founder of that, well, not the founder, but the kind of the chief guy for many years, who's now a member of the Privy Council, and I think, has been an activist for militarism in British society, during the Blair years. He wrote some of Blair's speeches. And I don't agree. I'm profoundly in disagreement with Lawrence Freedman and the bellicose path to order. The British Army needs to be, along with the other armies of the world, I believe, needs to be defunded, along with the American, the Australian, the Chinese, the Russian, the Indian, the Pakistani, and so on. We, the civilians of the world, the Matthews, the scholars, need to take back control from the military, which is gaming the system to its own self-advantage. And it does so by placement, like Lawrence Freedman, placed into positions of authority around the world, who just trumpet up the role of militarism and have a very ultimately cynical view of the world. When I talked to Lawrence Freedman about would he like to help with setting up the Institute of Peace Studies, he was one of the few academics who said no, never. Sitting on his little war studies empire, he said, no, I don't believe in peace. What's peace? It doesn't exist. What can you do with and there are millions of, thousands of people that think like that, scattered in American, and world polities, who have this very cynical view that only war matters. Well, that's the Herod argument. I'm sorry, I don't agree with it. I'm totally on the other side. I'm with the baby Jesus here. I'm with the Epiphany. I still believe that the Epiphany is more important than the Herod army coming to kill the babies. So that's why the Institute was created, in the teeth of opposition from the war studies and the kind of militarism types. But there's a network of peace academics scattered around the world. People like my friend Nigel Young, who wrote the very useful Encyclopedia of Peace, published by the University of Oxford Press. Paul Smoker, who's now dead and was one of our sponsors. We had in the beginning quite a few Nobel Prize winners and members of the Royal Society, Professor Tom Kibble. I mean, the Institute was founded by a lot of leading thinkers who were trying to see how peace impacts on their own disciplines, be it anthropology or philosophy or economics and so on. And the University of London has a long story of engagement with these things. I still would like to see a proper institute in the University of London system. And that's what I've been working for. But meanwhile, we're here as a holding operation in France and scattered around the world. And I recently, just around Christmas, produced a newsletter for us. It's 120 pages. One of my jobs as director is to kind of report on news and developments around the world. There's been a lot going on for peace behind the scenes. So I did a big newsletter, which anyone that wants can have. I mean, this is public work. It's not a private thing. And it's for the benefit of the British people, but for humanity and for the European people as a whole, where I'm based. But peace, I think, has to be universal. We have to claim it. If we want the good news of that Epiphany moment to bear fruit, we have to sort of say, yes, please, I want the Druids to give me those gold, frankincense and myrrh. I want those gifts for all humanity. By me, I mean the collective we. That's what UNESCO's pledged to us, just up the road in Paris. And that's why intellectuals, scholars, work for the discovery of common truths. That's why the university system was created in Paris. And it continues to this day, doing that work. So to me, scholarship is not a selfish pursuit. It's a public service. It's the Matthew, it's the scribe writing up the stories in retrospect about how the wonder can come into the world in spite of the Herods of history. Okay, so that's why I created also, as an offshoot of the Institute, back in the year 2000, the Global Green University, which is a unusual university. It's global, it's not tied to one particular place. It's got an ethic towards caring for the environment and ending the kind of war between man and nature, ending the war between science and religion, and ending the war between the haves and have-nots. So it's an ethically oriented project, the Global Green University, which is continuing. So it's like the beginning of our term. So welcome, hello, to students and prospective students who might want to register with us and study. It's a university that works through independent learning. So, but we will guide you in the research that you want to undertake. And you know, to me, academia is a collective operation. It's not about egocentric pursuit of knowledge. It's about sharing. You find out the truth that you can find out, and then you share it with the bigger community. And that's why on the website I put a lot of my commentaries on the entire commentary on the Quran, on the Gospels. So I've gone into the commentary on the Gospels, each of them, including the two Gnostic Gospels of Thomas and Mary Magdalene. And there's a very detailed commentary on Matthew's Gospel on there. So if you just, you know, find the Global Green University website, it's all there. And yeah, so it's the start of academic term. I want to just end with a couple of final thoughts. One of my great interests over the years has been Sir Isaac Newton, and in my book on religious mathematics, I'm coining and proposing a new discipline that we found, which is the intersection between religious studies and mathematical sciences. And some of you know I've been working on this for about a year. And one of the inspirers of that was Sir Isaac Newton, because he was a profoundly learned man, mathematically, but he was also very interested in religions. And this is not often known. He had profound love for alchemy and the Hermetic traditions. He was learned in ferreting away in the esoteric underground of European thought. He had a big collection of stuff on that. And he wrote a book about his views on religion that was called the Irenicum. And I think it deserves to be better known. It's a treatise found in manuscripts, in the Keynes manuscript. The thesis of the Irenicum, Irenicum, or Ecclesiastical Polity Tending Towards Peace, is as follows. All nations originally subscribed to a common religion. It consisted of two precepts: love God with all your might, and love your neighbour as yourself. Such beliefs Newton traced to the sons of Noah. They descended through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob and Moses to the Israelis. They descended thereafter, being disseminated to other nations by such figures as Pythagoras, Confucius, Socrates and Cicero. A scheme so simple must inevitably become corrupted. Later prophets, like Christ, came not to add to the original precepts, but to recall a forgetful people to the already established truths. So this book, Irenicum, which Newton wrote, exists in manuscript only, and he showed it to some of his 18th century fellow scholars at Cambridge in the theology department. He said, look, these are my views on religion. Shall I publish it? And they all advised him, no, it's far too radical. Don't publish it, Isaac, or you'll be done for heresy. You know, because his argument was that all religions come from one common ultimate source. Let's call that the white light. And then history raised them out into the rainbow colours that we know and love. Things like Judaism, Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, Jainism and so on. Now these ideas inspired my own periodic table, which hopefully you come across or know.